Just a brief introduction to myself. My name is Laura. Some of you will have met me before, others will have noticed me on the previous webinars. I work with my colleague Chloe Hodgkinson, who's here with us today. She's doing all the behind the scenes work. So if you have any issues, Chloe is the one to talk about problems with Zoom today. And I work in the Partnerships and Organisational Development team for FFI, and there's 4 of us. I have another 2 colleagues that also work with me. But it's really great to see you all today, and hopefully during the course of the year, I'll get to touch base with more of you. So today, hopefully by the end of this session, we will have gone through everything so that you will be able to know what an NGO governing body is and the reasons why you might have one. You'll be able to identify which responsibilities are for NGO management and which are more for the governing body. You'll be able to describe what a balanced governing body looks like, and then also identify how your organization's governing body could be strengthened. And that might be the most interesting part for some there. So what is governance? There isn't a single exhaustive definition of the word governance, but it does come from the Greek word meaning to steer, which is quite apt. People on a board are brought together to apply their knowledge, their expertise, and normally to manage some of the major challenges that can face an organization. Essentially, a governing body is there to make sure that voluntary organizations are effective, accountable, and have direction. So this is the group that will keep the organization on track and focused on delivering its mission. And there are lots of different types and examples of governing bodies. And we've had a couple already. So 4 organizations said they had a board. You might call it a council. You might refer to the individuals on the board or council as trustees. Even sometimes the word director gets put in there. So there's lots of different terms, but they all have a similar function in terms of how they manage or steer the organization. And you can see on the right in this picture, lots of different structures about how organizations can form with their governing body. Okay, so the reason for the picture here is if the governing body doesn't steer correctly, there might be some problems. I just want you to think, as I'm talking, why do we need a governance structure like a board? So as I'm talking, just have a think, and I'm going to ask for your responses in a moment. But I did a little bit of research about how many NGOs know or have a board. And apparently from a study that Stanford University did, they found that only or just half of non-profit board members understand their obligations or their role for the organization. So there are lots of board members out there who don't really know what it is they're doing on the board or what they can do to be most effective. And there was another report by an accounting firm, of all things, who looked at boards, and they found that only 20% of non-profit boards consider board engagement a top priority. So, and that's actually quite understandable. If you're a small organization with a lot going on, there tends to be 1 or 2 people that are making things happen. And a board sometimes isn't the first priority and the first thing you'll think about. Okay, so Why do NGOs and CSOs need a governance structure like a board? And I have the answers, but they're behind these green boxes. So in the chat, or you're very welcome to call out, why do you think an organization might need a governing body or a board? Why do you have a board? Okay. If you also would like to say it in French and Burmese, you're very welcome to write in French and Burmese too. So please do put that in the chat and we can translate. Okay, right. So Faye, to set the strategic direction of an organization. Okay, great. You have found an answer. Now let me see if I can click it. Yes. So it's up to your board members to make sure they have enough time to have board meetings, to make sure that the strategic direction of the organization is going where it should be. The board have a vision. Yep, they need to effectively make sure that the organization is following that mission. Yeah. The board can have a larger and clearer perspective on the development of the NGO. Yep, I think that fits nicely under that first, ensure effective organizational planning. To give direction to the organization to meet its obligations. And Abbas, you said it's to take into account the points of view of the staff and to approve the budgets. Yes, definitely. So yes, liking all of that. So we've got a few correct answers. Well, they're all coming now. Here we go. So provide proper financial oversight. So the board will see how much money is coming in and out of your organization to make sure it's managed effectively. Okay, yep, Ian, to appoint directors and management of the organization. Great. To find solutions to support the NGO's activity. Yes, definitely. And to make decisions for organization. And then Kath, you said responsible for compliance, HR and finance. So yes, all these are coming up, which is fantastic. We did have select and evaluate the executive director, brilliant. We had advocate the organization or improve the organization's public standing, to talk, to find solutions to provide that board's activity, fantastic. And then we also had legal obligations. So make sure that your board needs to be aware of those obligations in country that the organization needs to fulfill. It's their responsibility to do that. And then finally, let me just look through. I don't think we've had this one. It's to provide sufficient resources. So the board is there also to support with fundraising, to help bring in those resources and that money for the organization. And that is one of their roles, is to make sure the organization stays financially viable. And then lastly, to recruit and orient new board members. So it's their job to bring in members, new board members onto the board as well, to make sure that who needs to be there is there. So that's their role. Well done, though. I think you got them all. So you're obviously fairly clued in into why you might have a board, which is great. So what happens if we don't have good governance? And you can see from the headlines here that there have been a number of large organizations that have experienced problems and haven't necessarily been governed effectively. Oxfam has had problems in the start, in the past. And it can take time and energy away from the organization having to deal with these issues that might have been managed if governance had been a little better. And it might be, these problems might occur because the governing body isn't paying attention to what's going on in the organization, which is what seems to have happened here. But also sometimes the governing body can pay too much attention to what's happening in the organization, and that can cause equal problems. BirdLife has a very good document about governing bodies and how they can be effective. And they give some examples. And in one example, they were working with a board who believed that they were responsible for everything and had to be involved in every decision, despite having very competent staff. They were involved in all the little decisions that the organization was undertaking. And that left no time for them to be then engaged in the bigger, higher level issues that were facing the organization. So they were doing too much, essentially. Another example of an organization having problems, there was one in Africa, an NGO in Africa, didn't keep up to date with the changes in their national legislation. And that's the governing body's responsibility. And because of this, it left them with big legal problems and they weren't able to claim certain tax benefits. So it wasn't perhaps as big as these news headlines here, but it did cause problems. And again, that was the responsibility of the board to oversee. So all I want you to do is when you're in breakout groups, don't do it yet. Just put which post-its fall under board and which post-its fall under management. So there'll be some written terms there. Move them to their correct place. Okay, so what I've got on the screen at the moment is the answers. So with the board, we have approve the annual objectives and the plans. The board also can finalize and approve the budget. The board, as we already said, can recruit the executive director. The board can also appoint board members, and the board can also ensure that an annual audit of NGO accounts happens. So that's their roles. On the management side, normally an executive director or a chief executive will be in charge of recruiting and dismissing staff, preparing annual objectives and plans, preparing preliminary budgets, organizing fundraising, and managing the delivery of programs and services. So there were two sneaky ones in there. The two post-its in yellow here, promote networking and collaborations with other organizations and ask for contributions in fundraising campaigns. Could be either. So now that you can see all the answers, did you have anything different? Would you say any of those actually isn't the way it operates in your organization is different? Okay. So I think it is just safe to say, Elena did point out that there is a difference between preparation and approval. So the ED, the executive director, will prepare and get everything ready and do all the work, and the team with that person will do all the work. And then the board needs to review and has oversight of quite a lot. Key here is that asking for contributions in fundraising. Again, not everybody realizes that it is both the job of the management team and also the board as well. And again, networking, really important. So your board will have lots of different connections potentially to advocate the organization and make it public. So the next slide, there we are, is just clarification of that. So governing is about making certain the organisation is working to fulfil its mission, providing that financial oversight, and ensuring it operates within the law. And then management is implementing the strategies agreed by the board with all that detailed planning, putting procedures in place, and by raising money. Okay. Any questions? So don't read the text on this. It's not to be read right now. All I have done here is just give a snapshot from our organisational resilience check. And some of you will be aware of that, but it's a checklist of different statements that you can use to see where you feel your organisation is. And this is the governance section, and it might be worth sitting with your board and going through this to review some of these statements to see if any of these you think should be happening better, should start. Maybe you already have these in place and you can say, yes, great, we've already got that. So it's a really helpful document just to check through and together to talk about it together, because some people may not know or understand as much as you think about what their role is on the board. So this is a good way to check in. So having looked at the types of board, we're now going to look at the responsibilities and the composition. And people are brought together on a board who have different knowledge, different experience and expertise that should be able to help the organisation deal with any challenges that may arise. But let's look at the responsibilities of the trustees. You'll notice I've switched here between board to trustees. Particularly in the UK, we refer to it as a board of trustees sometimes. It doesn't matter what they're called, but I just want you not to worry too much about the different terminology here. But there's a lot of organisations and a lot of board members who don't actually realise that they have rules and responsibilities that they need to adhere to. So there are two sets of formal rules. There's the governing document that the organisation has, and that might be called a constitution, memorandum and articles of association, trust deeds. And they're what sets out how the trustees or the board will operate and what their role is. The second, and probably more important, is the law. So there are certain acts within a country normally that will govern how a charity is to operate and the responsibilities of those who are governing it. So for example, in the UK, we have the Trustee Act 2000, and that sets out how board members should operate. And it's important to note maybe that your national laws, and this is the case in the UK, may dictate the extent to which an individual board member is actually personally legally liable for the activities of an organisation. So as a board member, you become responsible legally if things go wrong. And it's good to be clear, or to make sure that your board is clear, or the board members are, about that and what those are. Just to have a quick look at the governing documents, I know from some of the partners that I work with, these are and have been quite important to get right. They need to be kept updated. So there's different types of governing documents for a board. Articles of incorporation is the first, and this is a legal document filed with a government agency, and that registers an NGO and includes its purpose, and the board names and members will be listed there. There are bylaws or constitution, and this contains the rules for board management, for example, how often the board will meet, quorum requirements, but they're normally kept broad enough that you can make amendments with time. So these are often quite broad rules. You've got your mission statement, and that is useful for the board and the organisation as a communications tool. It doesn't govern the board, but the board has to make sure the organisation follows and is sticking to that mission statement. And it just explains to everybody outside of the organisation what the organisation is doing. And then you have the very detailed roles and responsibilities of trustees or the board, and this is how they're going to conduct themselves. And so, for example, in FFI, we have rules that say the board must act in FFI's interests and comply with the law. And these are things that you can generate yourself, and there may be different roles and responsibilities for different types. So a treasurer who oversees the finance may have different roles and responsibilities to perhaps the chairman. So it just depends. We have resources, and our own UK Charity Commission provides templates for some of these things. So if you're in the UK, the Charity Commission is great. And if you're not, it still might be useful to have a look, but it's always very good to check with your own governing bodies, your national government, and make sure that things comply there. I've missed executive committee terms of references. So that's just, again, references about how often an executive committee will meet, the expenses policy, just different things that document different information about the board. It's useful to have these, and it can be quite laborsome to have to draw them up, but then it's also important to make sure that the board understands and is part of what is written in these documents. Any questions? Okay. Keep writing if there is, as I'm talking. So the composition of the board. And again, it could be called a management committee, council, executive committee. It's less important about the name than the role that they play. And it consists of individuals who will work together to take overall responsibility. Just to say that they have to act collectively. So it's not one individual making a decision, they're a collective group, and they can't act on their own unless they've been authorized by the board to make decisions on their own. And again, there is a formal role and they have legal responsibilities. Most of the board's work takes place at board meetings. So at those meetings, boards will often concentrate on the big issues, making key decisions, monitoring and delegating day-to-day work, sometimes to others. But they're there for oversight rather than the nitty-gritty. And again, just to check in and make sure that the organisation is following its mission and nothing untoward is going on or happening. I like this slide. It's the picture on the left. It makes me laugh. Board balance. So again, thinking about your board, and if you have a board or you're on a board, just keep in mind who is there on it. So the trustees will have different knowledge, different experience, and different expertise. And it's important to balance the number of people. It depends on the size of your organisation, how many people you have on the board. A medium organisation might have 5 to 7 people. It can be useful to have an odd number on your board. So if there's ever a vote, you don't meet stalemate. You've always got an odd number to help with that voting. Skills. Balancing the skills. Do you have everybody on your board that you need? Do they have the skills to be able to help you? effectively manage your organization. Perhaps there are gaps. Do you need to invite someone else onto the board that has different skills that could be beneficial for the organization? And diversity too. And I'll talk a little bit more about diversity later on, but it's good to keep this in mind. And if you have a balanced board, it will help with holding productive discussions. You'll be the decisions will be able to be made quickly, and it will help just organize more efficiently the work that the committee is doing, that the organization is doing. Okay. I actually am on a board of trustees, and on our board of trustees for a small charity, we have too many board members. We have 20 board members and a staff of 3. So the balance is not right. And we have a lot of members, so that helps a little. But predominantly about 5 to 10 years ago, that board was entirely composed of men between the ages of 75 and 85. Now it's changed. We have more women involved, but it's still too large. So we're working on that. Just to jump into the skills. So again, reflecting on the skills of your board. And if built correctly, the board can offer a suite of resources. And these are some of them. So you might have someone on the board that has financial expertise, fundraising, someone who knows a bit about advocacy, networking. And that can be very important to have those types of skills. So it's often useful for board members to be able to put forward what skills they have as they join, or even if you haven't reflected on them. Sometimes they have hidden skills that you might not have been aware of. So it's good to ask what they think they can contribute. As well as those technical skills, then there's the softer contextual skills, which are just as important. And all your board or trustees should be able to demonstrate some of these values, including honesty and transparency. It's very good. I'm not going to read through all of them, but some of these, including clear communication, is important to be able to communicate not only to the public, but internally with the managing director and with the organization team. Being flexible, being accountable. These are some of the skills that are really important for a board to have. So I've talked about some of the skills, and then I've also spoken a little about the diversity. So age is important, potentially having a good, maybe a wider range of age, different experiences, different knowledge, different sectors coming in could be beneficial. Having a broader and more balanced gender within your board could also be beneficial. And then also making sure that your maybe 1 or 2 of your board members represent the stakeholders that your organization is looking to work for. So do you need a board member who represents certain stakeholders of people that you work with? So it can be hard to find this. What I'm talking about is an ideal, and it's not easy to find this always. So it depends on how many people you work with and what opportunities you have. So, but just to say, it is useful to think about, and also to question your board, to ask them what they think, what can they do, how can they help, and make the most of who is supporting you in your board as well. So I've been talking, and I just want you to take a few moments individually to think about your board, or if you're on a board, to think about that group. And as you think about your board, what skills and experience, can you list some of the skills and experience that your board has? Can you give approximate age range for your board? What about the gender? And then also stakeholder group, you know, are they represented in your board? And if you don't have a board or it's relatively small, that's also fine. It's good to think about these things as your organization grows. So thinking about what you might want if and when your board and your organization grows. So I'm going to give you about 3 to 4 minutes just thinking. So if you have a piece of paper, I would recommend just jotting it down, or even just on your computer if you have it there. Write down just quickly now the answers to these questions. Does that make sense? If anybody would like to share what they've written, just to see what the diversity of boards is within the group, that would be very welcome. Or if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. So if you would like to share briefly, you can either call out and talk or just pop it in the chat if you want to share what your board diversity is like. There we go. So you've got experience in your board in fundraising, networking, a background in conservation, species reintroduction and communication. And you have 2 men and 1 woman. That's a great amount of experience between 3 people. And it's quite a suite of skills there too, in terms of having fundraising and networking. That's great. And I can understand 3 people. You need that many. Frida, okay, the East African Wildlife Society. Skills include law, finance, conservation, fundraising, and media. Also very helpful. So yes, I wonder if there's any that either of you could think that actually maybe you could do with more. Are there any gaps? But that seems useful, and I hope they're able to provide some of those skills to the organization. And Alina, you say the media age is 45. Yeah. I don't think it matters really. It's just making sure that perhaps you've got the, sometimes different ages can bring different perspectives on things, but it really depends on the size of your board and how many people are there. Thank you very much for those 2 examples. Okay, if anybody also feels that they would like to share, please do. Okay, so I think a number of you will be part of small organizations. So as an organization grows and matures, though, the role of the board will change. So if you do have younger organizations or smaller organizations, the board tends to be more personal, a bit more hands-on maybe, because there's a lot that needs to happen. And so they're pulled in maybe more to the day-to-day things as well, just because of the nature of the small size. But then as you move from that smaller or younger organization, you move from founders to externals, the organization matures, becoming a bit more formal, more professional. And the board follows and will need to change in terms of how they operate and who they're composed of. So as you become more formal and the organization grows, you'll need new skills and also the money to support that growth. So you'll need to think about new board members to contribute to the people that are already there, thinking about that experience. What is it that your organization needs to be able to grow? Who can you ask to join the board to be able to provide that experience to support the organization? I think very often, particularly at the start or with smaller organizations, a lot tends to rest on the executive director or the small team that's managing. So there's a lot of responsibility. there's a lot to do. And actually, sometimes it's remembering that they don't always have to shoulder everything, and that a board, an executive committee can help with that responsibility to take on some of the things that need to be done. So it's just thinking about how to achieve that with your board. Yes, particularly as it grows, you need more support with the strategic direction as well. There's a lot to do just for a few people. Turnover. So having a steady and predictable turnover can bring new ideas and new skills, and prevent any members behaving as if the organisation is theirs. And that can happen, particularly if members have been there from the start. They're very attached to the organisation, and quite rightly. But sometimes being able to change the type and the number of people that are there, it means that you have different experience and fresh perspective. Generally, particularly in the UK, the term is 3 to 5 years for a trustee member, but you can, in your governing documents, decide on what that might look like. And you might have 2 terms put together, and then that's it, that board member has to step back. So as I said, the length of appointment is usually in your bylaws or written in your bylaws. But then that is hard to balance that with the talent pool. If you don't have a big group of people to pull from, it can be harder to have quicker turnover. So it all needs to be thought about, and understandably, members may stay for longer. You might have subcommittees if you do have a big board, or if you need extra thinking on certain topics. You may have subcommittees, and this might be to focus on finance, to focus on fundraising, education. And this is just an additional group of people to provide extra thinking and brain power on some of the challenges that your organisation might be facing. And at least one person on that subcommittee will be a member of the board. They need a clear remit. So if you do have a subcommittee doing some of these things, they need to have clear guidelines as to what their purpose is. But just remember that if you do have subcommittee and they do make decisions, the board still has ultimate responsibility for ensuring that those decisions are taken responsibly. Meetings. Haha. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to go to a board meeting. I've been to a few. And it's very true that the quality is more important than the quantity. So even if you can't meet very regularly, it's really important that what you do talk about, if board members can come together, is about the important issues and the things that they need or you need the board to discuss, not necessarily the routine things. The frequency may be set in your laws or your constitution. Again, it's up to you how often, or the board, how often they can meet. Sometimes that's difficult depending on how remote they are, what the internet connection is like. So it can be tricky. They need to be efficient, productive and engaging. So if you do have important things to be discussing, stick to the point. And then setting agenda and finishing on time. So making sure they don't go on for too long. But the other thing is also to keep your board engaged and to make sure that they feel like they're contributing. So it is important to arrange and make sure that they are coming together to invest in the organisation and they know what they need to do in order to support it. Right, I've got another activity for you, and I'm going to ask Chloe to put you into breakout groups. And there are a number of issues that sometimes come up. And in your groups, your language groups, it would be great if you could just perhaps discuss some of these I'll just run through them before I put you out. The first is, how do we foster a good working relationship with a CEO, but also hold them accountable? So how does the board work with the CEO or the executive director? The other one might be for, how can the board encourage trustees to attend meetings? That might be very hard. How would you resolve that issue? We are struggling to find a trustee to give their time for free. It's not always easy to find the people that you need to offer their time. And then another thought, we're too small to need a board. We don't need one right now. And these are just some of the things that we've heard working with partners, some of the issues. There may be others that you actually would prefer to talk about as a group. So you can either talk about these or another issue that comes up. Chloe has just put a link into the chat again, and this takes you to another Jamboard where these questions are located, and you can use these as prompts. You don't have to write down anything if you don't want to, but it might help, and we can share those perhaps a little later. Hi everyone, that looked to be from the boards, some good conversation going. And we've got a little bit of time for some feedback. So I just thought we might go through each question and get some key points from any groups that would like to share. So the first question that you are looking at providing answers for is, how do we foster a good working relationship with the CEO, but also hold them accountable? Anybody want to put forward some of the key thoughts that their group was having in any language, Burmese or French or English?
Okay, I can tell you what we found out in our group. I'm from a small organization, but based on my colleagues' experience, we said that it's very important to have a very clear terms of reference for the CEO and a clear strategy with deliverables. We talk about the corporate scorecard with clear objective in order to be able to hold the CEO accountable. Also, we discuss about communication and the meetings that we can have with this CEO to build a relationship, a good relationship. So clear communication between the board and the management team with structured approach for questions, a minimum of annual board meetings with executive committees meetings, more frequent with the management team to build good working relationship, maybe once a month or whatever is suitable for our work. And also it's important to have transparent decision making and documented decision making to not lose track of the communication between these parts.
Thank you, Alina. So there was a lot of good points there. And having a structure, I think, for questions, for a time to talk to the board and for the board to talk to the CEO is really useful. And documenting, you're right, I think, again, a lot can happen. So to have that documentation, to make it transparent, to be able to use it in discussions is really useful too. Yeah, and having the board meetings or having meetings, really useful too. Anything else that team would like to add on, that English group 2 to that?
Yeah, it was a new suggestion for me was, I think it was Faye from South Africa that suggested this corporate scorecard with very clear objectives. And I quite like that because it just seems like a very, simple decision-making tool alongside the kind of terms of reference for the CEO, so it'd be interesting to see that as what kind of tools we have to support the CEO to make sure that we are delivering against our strategy and objectives and things. And just, it was a new suggestion in the kind of NGO sector for me. So.
Okay. That was Faye, was that made the Faye, if you've got access to a resource like that, and we'll be happy for us to share it, very, very grateful to have it.
Yeah, I've just made a few of my own, but I'm happy to share the format.
If you could, that would be really good. Thank you. I think anything that you've tried, new ways, may be really helpful. Thank you, Ian, Faye, for that. Anybody else from another group? The French, or I know there was only one person in the Burmese group, but would you like to offer anything else in addition, any other ways of meeting that issue?
Ok, pour la Guinée, on a dit que établir un planning de réunion, veiller au respect des règlements, pour prendre en compte les opinions des membres, prendre en compte les charges liées aux différentes réunions. C'est-à-dire pour que nous pouvons encourager les membres du conseil d'administration, il faut que nous fassions un planning de réunion pour que, bon, qu'on sache à quel moment, à quelle période on peut faire les réunions. Là, tout le monde est informé. Ensuite, aussi, pendant les réunions, il faut aussi écouter les autres. Il faut prendre en compte ce qu'ils disent. Je crois que c'est ce que nous avons décidé. Et en plus, il faut prendre en compte les charges liées aux différentes réunions. Si, par exemple, la réunion se tient chez nous ici, par exemple, à Conakry, tout le monde est dans les quartiers éloignés, il faut permettre aux membres de conseil au moins d'avoir les transports pour qu'ils puissent participer aux différentes réunions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that contribution. So yes, you're right. Having a structure and writing down questions helps also to make sure everybody feels heard too, to write down some of those responses. And sorting out a meeting place can also be useful for everybody to come together, but I understand can be difficult to get people together to do that. But it is important. So thank you for that contribution, Abbas. That was really good. So Martha has also kindly just popped in the chat about what Zwe was talking about in the Burmese breakout group and the importance of having shared values and objectives for fostering good relationships. So yes, that's exactly right. I think having those shared values and making sure that everybody is clear about the objective really helps in terms of making the board effective. Because if you don't, there's often then greater chances for differences of opinion and conflict. So that's a really good point. Thank you, Zwe. Next question. How do you encourage trustees to attend meetings? Perhaps the other English group one tackled this one. Have thoughts that they would like to start with?
I mean, there's some really practical stuff about planning them in advance in a time, putting it in diaries so it's not just, oh, tomorrow we're going to meet, so that people are able to carve out the time in their diaries. I think that's a really important approach.
Thanks, Kath. Yeah, definitely. Making sure that everybody has the time to do it and it's planned for. Yeah, I think that's really practical. Any others? Frida?
Yes, Laura, I would say that, having a calendar for the meetings probably for the entire year.
Okay.
Also ensuring that meetings are kept short and to the point, following the set agenda for the meeting, and also probably once in a while having the meetings out of office, maybe a retreat, so that it is fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like that. Thank you, Frida. They're great. And you're right. People need to be kept engaged, and no one likes a long drawn out meeting. Need to be planned in advance. So, plan in your schedule, carve out the time, and then making sure that sometimes you have a little bit of relaxation, or at least an avenue or a venue that you can enjoy coming together. Great. Thank you. Did I hear someone else? Unmute then. Anybody else?
So, well, in the UK, and I don't know if this happens in other countries, but in the UK, there are sometimes big corporates hold events where you can go and present. It's only a charity I used to be a trustee for. You could go and present with a load of other charities to a group of corporate employees who were keen to share their expertise in whatever field it might be. So a kind of meet and greet, I guess, between charities and people interested to be trustees. And we certainly managed to recruit some trustees through that process. But I don't know if similar things happen in other countries.
Okay. Thank you, Kath. That's a really good idea, having a meet and greet for people to come and chat and talk about the organisation and come together. Has anyone done that before in any other, or would consider doing that for theirs? Does anybody have problems finding trustees to give their time, even just, you know, twice a year or 4 times a year, however often they meet?
Oui. Oui. En fait, vous savez qu'au niveau des organisations, surtout au niveau des bureaux exécutifs, souvent les gens ils font ça de façon volontaire. Alors, pour pouvoir encourager, attirer certaines personnes pour appartenir à cette structure, d'abord, la première des choses, il faut que l'organisation fasse une communication, comme ils l'ont dit les précédents, voir un peu ce que l'organisation fait, sa vision, ses activités de façon générale. Il y a des bonnes personnes qui sont à la maison, qui ont beaucoup d'expérience, mais ils veulent travailler, surtout par exemple des personnes retraitées, veulent vraiment aller travailler, mais ils ne connaissent pas où il faut aller. Mais quand on fait une très bonne communication sur l'organisation, je pense que pendant la communication, la personne peut saisir l'occasion et venir vers l'organisation. Donc, il faut vraiment faire une très bonne communication sur l'organisation. Donc, nous, on n'a pas vécu encore l'expérience, mais la vision que nous voyons, même si on n'a pas vécu ça, c'est une façon pour nous vraiment de pouvoir tirer une nouvelle personne qui peut venir. Merci. Merci.
Thank you. I think that's a really valid point. Being able to tell and help those who you would like to join the board or engage with the organisation, what it is you want them to do and what the organisation does, and how you communicate that effectively. So does Abbas have a method of doing that? Is it a one-on-one meeting to communicate what the organisation does or what they need? Could you ask him how they do that?
Bon, 2 choses. On peut organiser une conférence. Tout le temps, d'abord, avant de le faire, il faut identifier les personnes ressources. Alors, on peut faire ça, par exemple, au niveau dans une université auquel on évite vraiment les personnes ressources, tout ça. Et ensuite aussi, la communication peut passer au niveau de la radio et pourquoi même pas les médias, à partir des médias, pour dire que voilà ce que l'organisation fait. L'organisation est à la recette d'une personne qui veut travailler au niveau du bureau. Donc, je pense que c'est les 2 façons qu'on peut le faire.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you, Abbas. So it is, you're right, it's about building a relationship, maybe in the first instance. So I know it sounds straightforward, but I can imagine that takes quite a bit of time and energy to have to then engage and build that relationship to then encourage someone in. But it's a really good method. Thank you. And then finally, did anybody get to the last one? We're too small to need a board. And I think there's a lot of small organizations that perhaps don't have a board, haven't been able to do that. Did you discuss that in your groups? Did anyone talk about that in terms of some of the ways to mitigate that?
Oui, nous avons discuté par là. OK. Merci, nous avons discuté ce sujet. Vous savez, pour une ONG, en fait, le conseil est une obligation. Et si, par exemple, nous sommes petits et que nous voudrions avoir un conseil, peut-être que nous allons faire en fonction de notre taille. Ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire qu'il faut limiter aussi le nombre de personnel, le nombre de membres du conseil. C'est-à-dire, vous pouvez peut-être limiter à 3, 4, 5. Mais vous ne pouvez pas aller comme, par exemple, une grande ONG qui est là, qui a tous les avantages et qui peut faire la prise en charge de tous ceux qui vont peut-être intervenir dans ce conseil. Donc, en fait, le conseil est vraiment obligatoire pour eux, quelle que soit la petitesse d'une organisation ou d'une ONG. Mais en fonction de l'ONG, on prend le personnel. Merci. On prend les membres du personnel.
Okay, thank you. So in Guinea, you need a board no matter what, but maybe a small board, depending on what the organization is doing and its size rather than a large. Thank you, Abbas. That was a really good contribution. Anybody else? I noticed that English group 2 wrote some points down. Is there anything in particular that resonated from that group?
We discuss about it more because we are a very small organization, and we started a couple of years ago, and since the beginning we didn't discuss of having non-executive members on board. Mm-hmm. But as time passes, we realized that it's harder for us to play the two roles in the same time. It's not healthy. And so we talk about this, that you are never too small to have a proper board, and more non-executive members are a sign of how you say, a good way of developing an organization. So in Romania, it's very easy to have a new NGO, but if you really want to develop, it's important, no matter how small you are, to have a proper board and governance. That's our conclusion.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you. There are some good things. And yes, maybe you are never too small. And maybe at the start it's tricky to formalize. But I think it's useful to have to even just in an informal way. So then when ready, you can make it more of a structure and have it there already. Just to be able to support the one person that's often doing a lot of the work, which is the managing director or the executive director. And or that small team of core people that are doing all that work, to have that support sometimes is a bit of a relief almost. So to engage with others about it. Thank you. I'm just looking at time, so I'm actually going to stop the conversation there. Really appreciate all your contributions today. I know that we've only just touched on the surface of what you could really get into in terms of some of the nuances of managing and working on a board and with a board. And I will, on Wild Hub, I will put some of these questions and some of these responses there that perhaps you can add to. If there are other things that you would like to talk about that we haven't touched on today, that Wild Hub community room might be a place to do it. I don't have all the answers, although I will put some really good resources there too, and email them to you about thinking about how you might assess the diversity of your board, some of the processes that you might need to go through for hiring and thinking about how to hire board members. But if you do have specific questions that we haven't answered, reach out in the community. And there may well be others, like Abbas has just mentioned, who have similar things that they have been through that they can give thoughts and their perspective on. So please do use that chat. And then ask me if you do have questions. I'll be happy to ask. We have FFI experts as well. Alison Mortlock, who wasn't able to be with us today, she works on our governance and has a wealth of experience. So if I don't know, she might well do. So please feel free to reach out. So resources, emails will be coming to you probably tomorrow, actually, just so we can compile. A recording of this webinar will also be sent and put onto the community group too. So I will send an email out to all of you, and please feel free to share it with the colleagues as well. So I just want to say thank you. But before I do that, Chloe, have I forgotten anything? Or Martha? Great. So thank you for giving up your time this morning. Thank you so much to Grace and to Nathan for doing the translation. I know it's a lot of work, but it's brilliant to be able to include more people in this conversation. So thank you for that. And thank you to all of you for turning up. And I hope you have good afternoons, evenings, rest of your day. So lovely to see you all. Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
See you.